The Sixers have announced that Joel Embiid has been rolled out for the rest of the season. That's not really a big surprise. Michael Kaskey-Blomain wrote earlier today at 97.3 ESPN.com that the Sixers should just sit him out anyway. And, Michael, your wish is their command.
Yeah, Mike, I guess they were reading the site this morning.
Well, it's not a big surprise, right, that they decided to do this. It's just the way they've handled it has just been I describe it's complete ineptitude. The way they have handled this has been total ineptitude in all facets of this, especially when you put it side by side with what happened in Golden State. It's almost an identical injury, and they said, look, indefinitely, we'll revisit this in a month, That's it. No day-to-day. We're not stringing you along. And you could just see between that injury and the way they handled it and the Sixers injury and the way they handled it, where those two organizations are.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. It's a pretty stark contrast when you compare, exactly like what you said, how it's being handled in Golden State currently with, Kevin Durant and the Joel Embiid situation. And ineptitude was a great word. And that, at this point, it's just surprising to have to use that word because, that was half the reason that the Colangelo regime was brought in because they were, Brian specifically had experience in doing this, and Hinkie was viewed as a guy that was inexperienced. So to see them kind of so badly blunder this entire Embiid injury situation, it's just, it's surprising to say the least.
At this stage of the game, this is just an ultra cautious thing, or are you a little bit have a little bit concern for the email that they sent out that basically suggested that there was more what was it more pronounced injury to that meniscus?
Yeah, after reading the press release, I think it is fair to have a little bit of concern. When I wrote that article this morning saying that they should hold him out, that was more based off just a precautionary thing, saying that there's really no plus side to having him return this season, only potential negatives. But after they released this recent press release, as you said, it says the previously identified meniscus tear appears more pronounced in the most recent scan. That's not good to say the least. I mean, I don't know if it's worth a panic. They obviously have to follow up. Doesn't say that he needs surgery or anything like that. But the fact that it's, not necessarily healing, quickly or on its own in a great manner, it's definitely, I think, a little bit concerning.
You got to wonder here, all this medical advice that the Sixers have been getting and all these, minute restrictions, the fact that they couldn't see this earlier, is that an issue, you would think? I mean, come on. I mean, they say, well, his bone bruise has now improved significantly, but the meniscal tear is now more pronounced. Like, I find that kind of odd, like that wasn't something that was seen earlier, that the meniscal tear just now is more pronounced?
Right. I was wondering the same thing when I read that. That seems odd, especially since he hasn't played now in over a month, since his last actual regular season activity. So it certainly seems strange that this wasn't, that this would be something that would just crop up now over a month since he played in that game against the Houston Rockets on ESPN. But it's certainly not a great look for the medical staff, obviously, for the team. And not that they're, solely responsible for the way this has been handled. But at some point, it's year after year with these injuries that seem to, be initially reported as something, minor with a set date to come back, and they continue to snowball into these bigger scale injuries that end up encompassing much more time than originally expected. And that's, you have to start to wonder what's going on there behind the scenes.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, 97.3 ESPN.com. He wrote earlier the Sixers should shut down Joel Embiid. He is now done for the season. And, Michael, the hard part is you got the lack of transparency here. There are people that want to consume this product. They want to support this product. They want to be on board. They like the direction of the talent. But it's been packaged so poorly that it's really hard, I think, for them to justify the success and the progress that the team on the floor has made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in all the progress that was made during the month of January, too, that was, such a high streak and high note for the franchise, has just been really completely overshadowed in the past month now. Everything that's happened throughout the month of February, just with, obviously the Embiid injury, the Simmons injury, and the way they were just handled, I think, it's certainly turned off a whole lot of fans to, kind of what's happening with the franchise right now. And like you said, those same fans still support the players. They love what they saw from Embiid. They can't wait to see Simmons out there. They're excited for the future. But in the present right now, I do think that there's a growing sense of, kind of distrust and almost, resentment toward the Sixers, the organization itself, not necessarily the team and the players.
How much concern do you have then, Michael, if you're a Sixers fan, that you are putting an entire plan behind one guy who's played 59 games in his life, who can't stay on the court, and another guy who couldn't get on the court at all this year? How much is that an issue, that those are the two cornerstones of your optimism?
Yeah, I think it's an issue, and I think it's obviously becomes an increasingly more of an issue with each, setback that's been happening. I think it's a little bit more of a concern with Embiid, as he has, obviously now a little bit more of an extensive injury history with a couple different injuries rather than, Simmons, who has, basically had a pretty healthy background up until this recent injury, which hopefully can be classified as a fluke. But for Embiid specifically, as great as his rookie season was when he was out on the court, he obviously answered a ton of questions about what he could be, what his game is like, how good he could be. But the biggest question about him that's really been hanging around since he was drafted has not been answered this season. And that's, number one is if he can stay healthy long term. He eventually this season was one thing, but if this team is going to contend, consistently for a championship year in, year out, they're going to need more than 31 games at 20 some odd minutes a night from Joel. So, as good as he has been and as good as the numbers were, unfortunately, we're entering now another offseason where the biggest question surrounding the franchise is still, can Joel Embiid stay healthy for the long term?
And that is where I think they're going to start to have some people start to jump off. And I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, but you're going to start to have people that now will have a hard time trusting the health of the talent. Yes, the talent is uber, but I can't trust it. And I think that's a big problem. And you got to start to wonder whether Brian Colangelo was the right guy for this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you can't blame the people for, questioning the talent. This is now 3 years since 3 full seasons with Joel Embiid on the roster with 31 games to show for it. And, talent-wise, there's no question that he was the right pick at the time. He's leaps and bounds above, anyone that was drafted behind him in the third pick of that 2014 draft. But it's the same questions, that were kind of facing him coming out with the injury issues. And, if he's so much of the team now is kind of being built around him as the centerpiece, and you just have to, especially with the trade of Nerlens Noel as a guy that could have potentially been, if Embiid is never able to stay healthy, Noel could have been a guy that could potentially serve as a starting, a good starting caliber center. With him gone, I feel like that move obviously placed added little bit of added pressure on Embiid's health. And like you said, so much is just based around that now that it's it's definitely, I think, concerning for the fan base. And it's something, it's a new situation even for a guy like Brian Colangelo that you mentioned. Who has experience. He certainly doesn't have experience in a situation quite like the Sixers are currently experiencing because, quite frankly, no one does across the NBA. And, as of right now, I think it's certainly fair to question whether or not he was or is the right guy to really be in charge.
The silver lining, I guess, is Okafor gets an extended run here, and they can really say, look, do your best, because if you don't like your current role, this is your chance to audition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Him and Rashawn Holmes, I think will, like you said, it's the silver lining. They'll both finally get some, the consistent minutes that were just not available through the bulk of the season so far. With Okafor specifically, it's probably, like you said, somewhat of an audition, as it still doesn't seem, he survived the deadline. He outlasted Nerlens, which is something a lot of people didn't think.
And you wonder, Michael, how they managed the trade deadline. Did they manage the trade deadline with this information already in hand?
That's a fantastic question. You have to wonder, and the fact is, like I was just touching on, the fact that they would trade away Nerlens, knowing that Embiid has this injury that would keep him out for the season. That seems slightly even more egregious if that were the case. If this was information that they already had in their pocket and still decided to part ways with a guy that could serve as a very viable replacement option for Embiid, it would be, I think, another mark against the move.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, the real Mike KB, on Twitter as the Sixers announced today, Joel Embiid done for the year. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good one, man.
You got it, pal. That's something to think about. Did the Sixers manage the trade deadline with the Embiid news already in their hand and decide to move on from Nerlens Noel? Something to think about. 609-573-ESPN, 609-573-3776. Couple Flyers news. We told you earlier in the hour, right after 3 o'clock today,